You aren't actually lazy. Your brain is just stuck in a survival loop from 10,000 years ago. Evolutionary biology has hardwired your mind to hoard energy, mistaking your modern career goals for a life-threatening risk. It's time to stop fighting your biology and start hacking the neural triggers that turn your exhaustion into high-performance power. Here is something that almost nobody talks about openly. The most driven people you will ever meet, the ones with the clearest vision, the most genuine ambition, the deepest sensitivity to the quality of their own work, are often the ones sitting completely still, staring at a blank screen, wondering why they cannot simply begin. And I want you to notice something right there. I didn't say the laziest people. I didn't say the most distracted. I said the most driven. Because society has built an entire story around procrastination that does not match the psychological reality of who actually experiences it most intensely. We've been told that the person who delays, who hesitates, who finds themselves doing anything other than the one important thing is someone who doesn't care enough, someone undisciplined, someone without the will to succeed. But that story is almost entirely wrong, and the cost of believing it, the silent, grinding cost, is that the very people who feel it most deeply end up carrying an extra weight that has nothing to do with their actual capability. They're not failing to act. They're failing to act while judging themselves for failing to act, and that combination is where real paralysis lives. Let's go back to basics for a moment. Not to a classroom, just to think clearly together. Your brain did not evolve for deadlines. It evolved for survival. And for the vast majority of human history, the smartest thing your nervous system could do when facing an uncertain or high-stakes situation was to pause, conserve energy, scan for threat, and wait for more information before committing. That response saved lives, genuinely. The ancestor who hesitated at the edge of the dark forest, who felt resistance before stepping into an unknown environment, was the one who lived long enough to pass those instincts forward to you. Now, here you are. The forest is a project proposal. The predator is your own fear of being judged as inadequate. The dark edge of the trees is the blank page, the empty inbox draft, the spreadsheet you've opened and closed 17 times this week. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a performance review. Both activate the same threat detection system. Both trigger the same quiet but powerful signal. Not yet, not safe, not ready. Neuroscientists call the part of your brain responsible for that signal the amygdala, but forget the label for now. What matters is the function. It's your brain's alarm system. And in highly sensitive, highly imaginative, highly conscientious people, people who care deeply about outcomes, that alarm is almost always slightly louder than average. So when someone with a loud internal alarm system sits down to do something that matters to them, the brain doesn't just feel a little friction, it feels a genuine threat response, a subtle but real surge of anxiety, an instinctive pull towards something safer, something already known, something manageable. And because the human mind is extraordinarily creative, it will immediately find you something safer to do, something that feels almost productive. That's why your kitchen has never been cleaner than the week before something important is due. There is a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi who spent decades studying the conditions under which human beings perform at their absolute best. What he discovered was not what most people expected. It wasn't discipline, it wasn't willpower. It was a very specific relationship between challenge and skill, a narrow corridor where the task feels neither too easy nor too overwhelming. When you're inside that corridor, time disappears, resistance dissolves. You're not pushing yourself, you're simply moving. Csikszentmihalyi called it flow, and the reason it matters here is that procrastination is almost never the opposite of flow. It is the mind searching desperately for the entrance to that corridor and not being able to find it. Think about that for a second. When you freeze, you're not failing to try. You're standing at a door you can feel but can't quite locate. The effort is there. The desire is there. What's missing is the precise angle of entry that makes beginning feel safe enough to sustain.
And that is a profoundly different problem from laziness. It requires a completely different kind of solution. I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to sit with it rather than answer immediately. When you think about the thing you've been avoiding, and I suspect you have something specific in mind right now, what is the first feeling that rises when you imagine actually completing it? Not starting it, completing it. For some people, the answer is relief. For others, it's a strange, quiet fear. Fear of what comes after. Fear of being seen. Fear that the finished thing will reveal something true about them that the unfinished thing could never confirm or deny. This is what psychologists sometimes refer to as self-handicapping, though that term sounds harsher than it deserves. The underlying psychology is actually quite human. If you never finish, you never fully fail. The potential remains intact. The dream stays protected in the amber of incompletion. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most psychologically complex leaders in modern history, wrote in his letters about the paralysis of anticipating judgment. He understood that the deepest form of courage was not the absence of hesitation. It was moving forward while the hesitation was very much present. He called it acting through uncertainty, not past it. That distinction matters because the popular myth of high performers is that they don't feel the resistance. They do. They feel it precisely as much as anyone else. What differs is not the feeling, but the relationship they've built with it over time.
There is a version of procrastination that is healthy, and I think we rarely talk about that with enough honesty. Sometimes the pause before action is not avoidance, it's integration, the mind absorbing complexity, preparing beneath the surface in ways that conscious thinking cannot access directly. Charles Darwin spent years collecting observations before he allowed himself to articulate his theory. He wasn't avoiding the work, he was respecting the depth of it. The difference between healthy incubation and avoidance is not always obvious from the outside, and it's not always obvious to the person experiencing it either. But there are two questions that tend to illuminate the distinction quite clearly. The first is, does thinking about this task bring a quiet sense of movement, as if the mind is circling something with growing understanding? Or does it bring a dull, heavy shutdown, a kind of mental static where nothing gets clearer no matter how long you wait? The second is, when you do begin, even briefly, even imperfectly, does something loosen? Does a small thread of momentum emerge, even faint? Or does beginning feel exactly as impossible as not beginning, with no difference in tension? If momentum is accessible, but entry is hard, you are likely dealing with a threat response that can be gently, methodically worked with. If nothing loosens, if beginning brings no relief at all, that may be worth exploring with more care and with more support than a YouTube video can offer. Both are valid. Neither makes you broken. The Stoic philosophers had a concept they called amor fati, love of fate. It wasn't a passive surrender to circumstance. It was an active recognition that resistance to the nature of things costs enormous energy that could otherwise be directed into the work itself. Marcus Aurelius, who was by most accounts an extraordinarily reluctant emperor, a man who would have preferred philosophy to politics, wrote about the friction between what the mind wants to do and what it knows it must do. He didn't moralize about it. He observed it. He approached his own resistance with the same clinical curiosity he brought to everything else. That posture, curious rather than critical, is perhaps the most underrated tool available to someone navigating procrastination. Not because it solves the problem immediately, but because it changes the terrain. You stop being the person who is broken for freezing and start being the person who is observing a fascinating and solvable pattern. That shift alone changes the neurological experience of the moment. Self-criticism activates threat. Curiosity activates exploration, and your brain knows the difference. Here is where I want to offer something that I think often gets missed in conversations about motivation and resistance. Driven people don't procrastinate despite caring. They procrastinate because they care. The stakes feel real. The standard is high.
The distance between where they are and where they want to be is not a number on a page. It is a felt experience, alive in the body, pulsing with meaning. That sensitivity is not a flaw in your design. It is the same sensitivity that makes the work worth doing. The same internal precision that makes you capable of producing something genuinely good is the same mechanism that scans the horizon for every possible way the thing could fall short. You cannot remove the sensitivity without removing the capability. They are not separate features. They are the same feature, pointing in two different directions. What changes over time, for writers, for engineers, for scientists, for builders of any kind, is not the disappearance of resistance. It is a deepening familiarity with it, a recognition that the resistance is information, not verdict, that it indicates importance, not inability. Elon Musk has spoken in various contexts about the discomfort of decision-making under uncertainty, about the experience of holding deeply contradictory information and still being required to move forward. What he describes is not the absence of hesitation. It is a learned willingness to begin without all the information he would prefer to have. He called it acceptable risk, but underneath that engineering language is something much older. It is trust. Trust that beginning will reveal what waiting never could. So let's bring this somewhere quiet, somewhere you can actually use. Your procrastination is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems were built to do in the presence of something that matters. It is evidence of a mind so attuned to quality and consequence that it hesitates rather than risks getting it wrong. The task is not to eliminate that response. The task is to develop a slightly different relationship with it, to learn to say, with some calm and without the need for certainty, I see you, I know what you're doing, and we're going to start anyway. Not with force, not with shame, not with motivational declarations, just with the quiet, steady decision to reduce the size of the first step until the brain registers it as safe enough to take. One sentence, one line of code, one paragraph, one email that doesn't have to be perfect. Not because small steps are the destination, but because they are the proof that the door exists and that you can open it. The procrastination paradox is this. The very part of you that wants to do the work well is often the part standing in the way of beginning. And when you understand that, really understand it, the relationship with resistance changes. Not immediately, not completely, but it changes. You stop fighting yourself. You start working with yourself. And that, quietly, is where everything becomes possible. If this raised questions for you about why certain kinds of perfectionism or high sensitivity show up alongside enormous capability and enormous resistance, the next video explores exactly that territory. The connection between the way your brain processes meaning and the way it manages risk. It is a conversation worth having. Take your time getting there.